Okay, welcome everyone. Good to see you all here today. As usual, we start with a little text just to calm ourselves down and harmonize our thoughts. And today is from a book called The Way, the Truth, and the Life, O Caminho, Verdade e Vida, from Francisco Cândido Xavier. And it's the third chapter, and it's entitled Examine Yourself. And it's based on a passage from Paul in the Philippians chapter 2. When Paul said, "Let nothing be done in strife or vainglory, but in humility." And then Emmanuel brings us this interpretation and says that Jesus' work is endless. Within the orbit of this work, there's a place for every person and every solitary idea. If in the divine order each tree produces according to its own kind, in the Christian endeavor each discipline contributes according to his or her level of evolution. A human lifetime is not a season of pleasure. A person is here for the purpose of learning, and in this endeavor he or she should take advantage of the opportunity to learn and enable others to do the same. The Apostle Paul understood this truth, stating that we should not do anything in the spirit of strife or vainglory, but in humility. When you do something that goes beyond the scope of your daily duties, examine your reasons for doing so. If it is the result of an unjust desire for control, or if it is only due to an unnecessary argument, then watch your heart, so that your path may be less troublesome. But if you were just doing what you were supposed to, then even if you were seen as being strict and demanding, inflexible, or unfaithful, then accept the unjustified observation and carry on. Just keep doing your job, remembering that as he served others with humility, without strife or vainglory, Jesus himself was seen as imprudent and rebellious, a traitor to the law and an enemy of the people, but that he received his glorious crown on the cross. Okay, so now let's just close our eyes in prayer. And we can elevate our thoughts into our Master Jesus. And ask Christ to inspire our thoughts, inspire our hearts, so we can learn from him. So we can feel that his yoke is easy, that his burden is light. So we can take upon our crosses and follow him. We also ask for all the mentors from FSS to help us here today and to thank them for the opportunity to be here, to build our community, and to be in communion with God. Jesus, we ask that your kindness, that your love, that your peace be bestowed upon us today, tomorrow, forever and ever. So be it. Welcome. Great to see you all here. Just a reminder, on Wednesday, we have a guest speaker coming from Brazil.
You want to put the banner?
I couldn't connect.
No? Okay.
Yeah, I couldn't connect. Let's see if it happened to work. No. Anyhow, his name is...
His name is Guilherme Velho.
Thank you, Guilherme Velho. And he'll be talking today here at FSS on Wednesday, starting at 7 o'clock. We'll have a meet and greet. And then at 7:30...
Coffee break.
Coffee break, yeah. And then at 7:30, he'll start with his talk. And the topic is?
The topic is about mediumship, but it's pretty much, let me just read to you guys just 1 second. Yes, that's the one. We cannot solve it. That's fine.
Wednesday, right?
Yes,
Wednesday at 7 p.m.
7 p.m.
Sorry, I forgot. Em português is a imortalidade estudada à luz da psicografia. This is the topic, so everybody's invited.
That's, yeah, he will be speaking in Portuguese, but if there are any English speakers and you want that translated, then come chat with me and then we can make that happen. Okay. So again, thank you for being here, and we'll be talking about self-love today. It's a talk I gave 3 years ago, and I felt it was time to bring it back again. There's so much to talk about this topic. I even split this into 3 talks, but we'll focus on the first one today. And as always, I invite you all to participate, either in English or in Portuguese. It doesn't matter which language it is, as long as we're participating. And if you don't understand anything, please interrupt me. We can switch to Portuguese if need to. And this talk is based on a seminar that was done at the Federativa do Estado, Federação Espírita do Estado do Mato Grosso, lá no Brasil, by Lídio de Sequeira Filho, and it's called Safe Guidelines to Develop Self-Love. That's what this was based upon. And as far as literature, we use a lot from a book called Love, Unbeatable Love by Joana de Angelis. And also the Gospel, a couple passages from John and from Paul that we'll be talking about today. We usually start with a little reflection, a few questions just to make us reflect within ourselves. The first one being, what is the feeling of self-love? Do I know what that is? Do I understand what that is a little bit? And the second one is, how can I practice? How can I develop? Is it something that I can even develop, or am I just born with it? And then the third one, what are, if any, obstacles to develop this feeling? What could be stopping or preventing me from developing that? So here's where it's the very start of the talk, so people might not be inclined to share or to give their opinion, so I'll go ahead. But what is the feeling of self-love? Is this something that you guys have thought about? Do you have an idea of what it is? Do you have a perception of what we could be? And anyone? If not,
Sorry.
yeah, please go
I
ahead.
think that self-love is when you consider yourself first in a way that you need to put your priorities and, like, as you said, take care of yourself. So maybe, like, example, getting out of situations that you are being hurt and understand that you need to take care of yourself. I think that's the true self-love.
Very good. Usually, we can't really give something that we don't have, right? So if we don't practice self-love or self-respect or care for ourselves, how can we even do that for others? So, thank you.
I think there's, and this is something I'm still trying to better understand, which is what it really means. There's a large element of meekness involved in self-love. And I know there's always this reference that Jesus was meek, but I don't know that I still completely understand what that means. But in any event, there's a tendency for us, or at least me, I should speak for myself, to be the biggest critic in my own life and to be hardest on myself. And I think self-love requires just refocusing that gentleness begins and extends with us in our own lives as a first step, because how can we provide it to anyone else if we fail to be able to ever provide it to the person that we spend the most time with, which is ourselves. So
Absolutely.
So I think there's a great deal of that patience, that gentleness, that softness that comes with being able to accept that we are also here, just trying to do the best that we can, just as everybody else is, and to be caring and loving with that sentiment.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And if we look at what Kardec taught us about the divine laws in the Spirit's book, there is one divine law that's called the law of love, charity, and justice, and that's the overarching law. And self-love is very similar to that. It's that virtue that is overarching. So when we are describing self-love, we usually describe it with other virtues, like patience, like respect, like meekness, right? So it's interesting because every single virtue will eventually drive you to feel, to develop that self-love. So Alito actually defines self-love as using our time, using our free will to develop our virtues. Any virtue that we're developing, be it patience, meekness, humility, respect, and so on and so forth. Any virtue that we're developing, we are then practicing self-love with ourselves. Now we might ask, okay, so what do I have to do to practice self-love? Do I have to go, can I practice self-love at work? Can I do that at home? Can I do that here? Do I have to come to the Spiritist Center to practice self-love? Or do I have to go to a spa and do it by myself? Or leave my house? And it's interesting because you can practice this anywhere. For example, the one that I thought about that's dear to my heart. When I work, I have a lot of meetings. And sometimes you have a person in the meeting that's making you a little bit angry because of the things that they're saying. Might be criticizing your department or your work. And you're there at work and you're feeling a bit angry towards that person. In that moment, you can realize that. You can start to think and reflect within yourself that that person is also a son or a daughter of God, right? That we could practice some compassion towards them, even though the things that they're saying you might not agree. They're entitled to have their free will as well. And so you start to reflect and to think with yourself, and slowly that anger gets transformed into compassion, into kindness, into respect. And so that is also developing self-love. So you can do that at work, in a meeting. You can do that driving, road rage, that's another great one. right? There is an opportunity to develop self-love regardless of where you are. It's not the location that's going to allow you to develop this virtue. So there's the invitation, I guess, for all of us. And the most amazing thing is that the first one to benefit from it is ourselves. We're the first one to benefit. And then everyone else also benefits because we're feeling better. We're feeling at peace with ourselves. So as a result, that translates to everyone else. Anyone else has any thoughts about this? Yeah.
You know, I think there's also this idea of inherent dignity that comes with it too. That there's that we all, just by the nature of existing, have an inherent, constant, and ceaseless dignity that's ultimately given to us. You know, if we accept it, well, which everybody here I would say does, by God, because God created us.
Mm-hmm. God
chose that we should exist, and there's a ubiquitous dignity that comes with that for all of us, and oftentimes we fail to give it to ourselves to begin with, because again we come to the conclusion in many areas of our lives perhaps that we don't deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's there, and if we can allow ourselves to be open to it,
mm-hmm.
then the next step is, well, then that's something that deserves consolation and care, that dignity and love and compassion and self-love and compassion can develop from that.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. It goes in line with the thought that we can't give what we don't have, right? So when we are practicing those for ourselves, then we can more truly be respectful, be loving, and kind to others. But it starts with us. It starts with us. And we're going to go through a few passages from Christ where he did say that. He did invite us to go within. Please.
Just one comment, Victor. So I think sometimes we don't think about, I guess we were not introduced self-love, at least most of us, the true meaning of self-love. And when you start thinking about self-love, if you don't really go deep on the meaning, this can be a misunderstanding, like that you cannot have self-love because otherwise you're gonna be selfish.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't mean that you cannot love yourself first.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, we don't want anybody to be selfish. So I guess it's really trying to understand the true meaning of self-love. That you need to be 100% you and embrace your flaws and everything and work on these flaws. And this will be part of self-love. And then, as you said before, you cannot give what you don't have. So if you're being really true to yourself and try to learn and be the best version of yourself, then it's gonna come with self-love. It doesn't mean that you're gonna be selfish or anything like that. So I guess it's always a very good subject to study because most of us don't think about self-love, right?
Absolutely.
So we're like, I'm not gonna think about myself because otherwise I'm gonna be selfish. So it's not like that. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or I don't want to.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to find out what's inside.
So a good example is, oops, so sorry.
Go ahead, please.
No, it's just a good example to add to what Carol said is when you're in an airplane, right? They say put the mask first on yourself and then you help.
Absolutely, that's a great analogy. Thanks, Mary. Jude brought this before as well. Yes, we have to be in a place of. We have to be in a place that we can give ourselves out there to help, but we have to look after us first.
And as others have already commented, so putting yourself first is not selfish at all. And I have an interesting analogy about that. So imagine that you have a car and your car needs an oil change.
Mm-hmm.
So you go very fast to the next gas station to change the oil, or if a friend needs something, oh yeah, I'm gonna help you and so and so. But what about you? What if you give a break to yourself, or when you need something, oh yeah, you know, today is a day that I'm not feeling so good, so I'm just giving like a relaxed day for myself, or I'm going to put some priority of myself, take care, you know.
Mhm.
I think sometimes we disregard ourselves in this sense, and we try to help other people
Mhm.
first.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then realizing that we can develop this everywhere. It's very re-energizing because we could be at work and be practicing this as well. So it's a very interesting journey, and it's one that I guess Christ, he showed us what it meant to love one another.
I think like self-love goes more around the lines of acceptance. Like you accept you are imperfect.
Yes.
And knowing that, it doesn't mean that I will be always the way I am, but
Mhm.
like I accept my flaws and I accept that I am an apprentice.
Mm.
So I think like we all relate to the fact that sometimes we are way harder on ourselves than we are on other
Mhm.
people. So it's mostly like I try to practice that, like what would I say or what would I do
Mhm.
if someone made that mistake? Would I forgive? Would I say yes, that's okay, and practice some
Mhm.
other like virtues?
Yeah.
So trying to apply that to ourselves too. So goes like with meekness and humility and all
Yeah.
that, and accepting like
Mhm.
if you were perfect, you would be Jesus,
Exactly.
right?
We
So
wouldn't be
this is
here.
a lot of pride.
Yeah,
Thinking
absolutely.
that you're
It's very much
you
so.
cannot make mistakes.
It's very much so. Thank you, Jim. It's, yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that. And yeah, if we can forgive someone, why can't we do that with our own self? And so this brings us to Matthew chapter 22. And this was when the doctors of the law, how they used to call it them back then, they were always trying, Jesus, always trying to get him to say something wrong so they could then have a reason to arrest him. So that's why it starts like this. And one of them, a lawyer or a doctor of the law, asked him a question to test him. So again, they were testing Jesus because they wanted him to say something that was wrong, so again, they could justify his incarceration. And then they asked, teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And then Jesus, as smart as he was, he started with what's already in the Old Testament, saying, as he said to him, you shall love the Lord, your God, with all your heart, with all your mind, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. So this was the very first commandment, and again, he was agreeing with what was the law before. But then he added something else. He said, this is the great and the first commandment. But there's also a second one. It's very similar to it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And that as yourself there, it's kind of like the root of everything, right? It's working on loving ourselves first. That will allow us to love our neighbor. It'll allow us also to love God. So the greatest commandment is to love, right? Is to practice this self-love. So if you were to ask, Jesus, should I work on this? Should I try to understand a little bit more about self-love? Should I look into developing this? Well, he said it's the most important thing that you can do for yourself and for others. And then Joanna helps us a little bit here. Before. I wanted to spend a little bit of time, not too much time, but talking about the word commandment. I can speak for myself. That word sometimes comes with a very heavy connotation. I don't know about you guys, but commandment to me seems like something very, very harsh, something that's being imposed on me, something that if I don't do, I'll be punished by something else. And that seems to be a common theme, right? So then, if you look at, what does the word mean, or what did it mean back in the day? The word commandment actually in Hebrew refers to mitzvah, and mitzvah means conscious act. It means an activity. It means an exercise. So it's interesting because then it takes away this imposition that commandment might bring to an exercise, to an invitation, to improve, to a conscious act. So when Christ told us that the first commandment was to love the Lord and then to love ourselves, that wasn't him imposing that on us, but it was inviting us to exercise it. It was inviting us to take the conscious act to love, to practice love. So it's really interesting because it takes away any form of fear that commandment might bring us. You know, if you don't do this, something will happen. So if we think about it as an exercise, it can help us understand it with a lot more ease and with a lot more lightness to it. And then Joanna Gengelis, in that book, Love and Mutable Love, she says, love cannot be imposed. As it's said, love cannot be imposed. We can't just say, you must love yourself. That's not kind of like how it happens. She's saying that it can be developed and trained when not already there. So again, it's like a muscle that you train. It's like a virtue that you build, right? It takes practice. It takes time, right? But the beauty of developing a virtue, developing self-love, is that the more you develop, the more you feel good, the more at peace you feel, right? So it's what we call it. It's a virtuous cycle, right? The more you do it, the more you want to do it. And then she says, you know, if not already there. Sometimes we look at some people and they just have, you know, natural talent for being able to love, a natural talent to love themselves. And, you know, I don't. How come? Right? And then Spiritism actually teaches us that. Knowing that this is not our first time here, knowing that we've come from many lives before, that simply shows that those people, they've trained, they developed it before, and because they did the work, now they have it more developed, right? But it just, instead of us realizing, well, if I wasn't born this way, then I can't develop, that's not true. We can't. Same way that they did. So that gives us a bit of motivation, I guess, that is achievable, and Christ told us this, right? So he wouldn't tell us if it wasn't possible, if it wasn't achievable. Like we talked about before, right? The imposition, whenever especially when we're talking about virtues, every time we feel imposed, every time we demand ourselves to forgive, or we demand ourselves to have respect, that demand generates something that we'll talk about a little bit more, but we like to refer them as masks, or the pretend, or the fake. So meaning that I pretend to be a nice person, but deep down it's not really how that works. But we'll develop this a little bit more. I don't want to spend too much time here. And then just to finish off the passage from Christ, right? He ends with, on these two commandments depend all the law and all the prophets. So if we think about the fact that loving ourselves, our neighbors, loving the Lord, all the laws and all the prophets depend on that. So what was Jesus trying to say here? One of the interpretations would be that all the law, meaning all the divine laws, they depend on our ability to develop our self-love. They depend on our ability to love one another. So when we learn about the divine laws in the Spirit's book, the third part of the Spirit's book, for us to be able to understand those laws, to develop, to practice those laws, love is sort of like a requirement, if you will. It's part of it. Sorry, it's not a requirement, but it's part of it. And then the prophets. The prophets can be an interpretation around teachings, around learning, around developing, right? The prophets were the ones that brought us some knowledge. So any type of teaching, any type of learning, any type of development, Jesus is telling us that love should be part of it. Again, if we're trying to impose us to develop a virtue, if we're trying to impose a development, impose a teaching, impose a learning, that won't really work. We might understand it, we might intellectually understand that teaching, but we won't be able to feel it. For example, if I'm being imposed to love, let's choose that one. And I learn a little bit about love. I have the intellect. I have an understanding of love is, but it's going to be really tough to feel it because I'm being imposed to do that. So instead of feeling love, I might feel fear because that was imposed on me. But when it's done from within, like Jesus said, it feels a lot more natural, and it's something that can be built within and not imposed from the outside in. I've been talking way too much, so I'm gonna hopefully ask a few more questions. But this is what we've already talked about. This is where I wanted to spend time to talk about how we practice self-love. I think we've already talked a bit about it. But the one thing is that when we talk about self-love, so some of us that might be something very weak or something very mellow. We don't really want to pay attention to it. So first of all, understanding what it is, understanding the value, understanding the potential that it can bring to us, it's kind of like the first step. Because then we believe in it. We know the benefit that it can bring us, and then we can actually truly put time into it, to train it, to develop, and so on and so forth. So if we're still dismissing it or still not giving it enough importance, maybe we should learn a little bit more about it. And okay, now we're going to get more involvement. So when do I make the decision to exercise self-love? When do you think is like, okay, I can't do this anymore, now maybe it's time that I respect a little bit more about myself. Maybe now it's time for me to take a step back, like you said, and be a little kinder to myself. And yeah, like, do you know roughly, when has that happened perhaps for you, or when do you think is like a common theme that's like, well, I can't do this anymore, now I need to actually prioritize myself a little bit? Anyone?
Excuse me. I think that each one has their own limit.
Yes.
According to their experience and development. Some people, they can take longer. They can be in a suffering situation and take longer and not put themselves first. When they make the decision, they could at some point get tired of the situation, or at some point they could go for therapy and understand their own value and say, yeah, I need to put myself first. But it is a process. Yes. It is a journey. Sometimes you are not very skilled at, but then as time passes, you realize, oh, I think now it's time for me to take care of myself.
Absolutely, thank you. Exactly. So yeah, when we talk about this, it's usually brought by something that's bothering us. It's either a pain, something that's not going so well, or even suffering, right? When we're a deep level of pain and we start suffering and we're like, I can't do this anymore. I gotta find something to get out of this, to improve. And so yeah, we talk a lot about this here. I'm not gonna dabble too much into it, but it is, we call it like the invitations that God brings us. So he brings us, and I'm going to use a very frugal example. I apologize for it. But just thinking about kids and teaching them about hygiene and thinking about flossing. Very, very rude example, right? But, we should floss. We know it. Perhaps sometimes we don't do it. Until you get a toothache, until it starts to hurt, right? That's the first realization. It's like, well, maybe I should be doing what my parents are telling me. and then I go to the dentist, and do some cleaning, and then it works. Right? So then you think, okay, maybe I should start flossing so it doesn't hurt anymore, and it goes a week, 2 weeks, and then it doesn't hurt anymore, so you stop. Until you get a cavity, then it really hurts. Right? And then you finally realize, okay, I have to do this, I have to floss so I don't feel that pain anymore. So the invitation, I apologize for the example, but the invitation of flossing happens every day, right? So the invitations that we get from God to develop a virtue, to develop self-love, happens every day. But a lot of us are stubborn, and it's not until we feel a little bit of a pain, a little bit of a nudge. It's not only until we feel that that we realize, well, maybe I should then be respecting myself a little bit more, and so on and so forth. So it's usually driven by pain or suffering, but it doesn't have to. And there is a question in the Spiritist book that talks about this. Like, do we have to suffer? And no, that's a choice. As bad as tricky as this might sound, but it's the suffering doesn't happen overnight, right? It's something that's being built over and like the cavity doesn't happen overnight, right? It's something that's being neglected over and over and over again until you get into that situation. So the suffering, in a way, it's how we call it. It's not what's we don't need the suffering to give ourselves more respect or to make the decision to develop this, but it certainly wakes us up, right? And hopefully, once we realize that, then we can actually spend some time and dedicate ourselves to us, dedicate ourselves to developing our virtues. And then the suffering will likely be gone. But yeah, just wanted to reflect about the idea that the invitations to develop self-love happen every time. We don't need to feel pain, we don't need to suffer. But our stubbornness sometimes makes us choose that path, right?
Can I?
Yes, please.
I used to compare that pain is like a little dot, right? So pain is one dot, another pain, another, and it gets so close together that it's become a line called suffering. So what I started identifying as a pre-pain sign would be something that it's agitated myself inside, whether it's any negative feeling that would come into the situation. And as adults, we always learn that we cannot react when we feel anger or something, because something is going to be wrong.
Yeah.
Right? So when we identify that agitation, I'm saying what I try to do, because it's impossible to do all the time, but it's not impossible actually. It's just hard. It's just hard. Exactly. It's just lots of work. But then when it's agitated me and then I cannot answer immediately, then I hold that thought and then I can reflect out of that scenario, right? So I call that my pre-pain action to avoid that pain, because in my personal experience, obviously, that if overreact, you will have a reaction.
Absolutely.
And that will be a pain, right?
Exactly.
So then it's just analogy.
Thank you very much, Mary, because that was the next question, is when did I realize the opportunity? And it's all about what we read in the very beginning. Try to recall, but it's talking about examining ourselves, being able to detect those. It's exactly like you said. Detecting, for example, in that meeting that I brought up, detecting, oh, I'm actually feeling angry. Maybe that's not the best way, but also respecting ourselves and allowing us to feel that anger, realizing that we are not perfect. We still have those, what we call these egoic feelings, or anger, rage, hatred, and so on and so forth. Right? We still have those within us. So the first step is realizing, like, oh, I'm feeling a little bit angry right now. maybe I should reflect a little bit to see if I can slowly and respectfully transform that feeling within ourselves. The first one starts with realizing it. Right? Yeah.
I think your analogies and the other analogies provided that build on into this idea of pain is very apt. It seems for many of us, definitely for me, many times in my life, the point at which we're willing to change is often when the pain and the suffering of continuing to do that which is making us so uncomfortable finally becomes greater than the fear and anxiety that we feel to do something differently. And people will, and that fear and anxiety can be extremely strong to the point where people will avoid it, will put themselves into a situation to continue suffering just to avoid that which they feel so much greater. And, you know, sadly even, some people I feel take this to the extreme of considering, you know, even self-harm, up to and including in some cases suicide, rather because they will try everything to avoid the pain, and oftentimes will only get to the point where then they say everything else didn't work, that they will then say, well, then let's just try to change something. But that fear and anxiety can be so strong that it can keep us from doing it, to your example about flossing, until the point where it's so painful, the cavities that we keep getting, and we say, I'll just grab that little string and stick it in between my teeth.
Right.
You know?
It's not that much work.
No, but you know, that you use a very great word, that stubbornness to continue in our regular old habits is extremely strong, and can cloud us from that realization that can come from it. So I think there's, ironically, maybe a great beauty in this life, because it's in all of this suffering that we're given the greatest gift to find that joy that exists within us, that we can only really learn to appreciate by going through all of those cavities that we finally learned how to fix our teeth.
Yeah, it's catching on.
That's right.
And thank you, Attila. And it's interesting because when we think about the pain or the suffering, they are there to protect us. Right? They're there to protect our teeth. Right? It's for us to do something. So a lot of times when we talk about the law of cause and effect, which is in place in this situation, it's there to protect us. It's only to show us that, you know, our behaviors are not perhaps the best ones. So maybe we should look at changing it a little bit. It's there to protect us. It's not there to make us feel pain or to make us suffer. That's just a consequence. But the true, the underlying point of it is to protect us. It's a divine law of cause. Call it the law of cause and effect. And but one of the good examples that I like about this is, let's see, I'll try to describe it and maybe someone will pick it up. So if you think about someone that's living in that suffering, and we have a great example. So it's, for example, that person that is blaming everything that's wrong in their lives onto someone else. Right? All the pain, all the suffering that I'm having, it's because of what others are doing to me. And then this person was in such deep suffering that they were actually chasing those people that he thought was causing him harm. And in that chase, that's when he encountered Jesus. And it was in that moment that he realized that actually the suffering that I'm feeling right now, it's not because of others, but it's because of my own choices. It's because of my own actions. And the beauty in it is that we can control our own actions. We can control our own decisions. And when we realize that we can control what's making us suffer, that's when we can get out of it. So if we're still thinking that the suffering it's being caused by others, the fact that we can't control others, that means we're going to be suffering all the time. So this man, his name is Paul of Tarsus, he realized that all the suffering that he was feeling was not because of the Christians that were around him, but it was because of himself. And in that moment with Jesus, he flipped a switch. He got out of that suffering, and he realized that he did have control over his decisions. He had control over the things that was causing him harm. And from then on, he went to be one of the greatest apostles of Christ.
I like when you say that, because like one thing that I like to think about, and I use quite a bit in my career, in my profession, is like that pain is inevitable and suffering is optional.
Absolutely.
So it's just like pain is, we are in a world that you came to proofs and expiations and things, crappy things, and pardon my language, does happen to you.
Yeah.
But then when, and your example was very good, when you just put it elsewhere and you blame things and you blame other people, that's where the suffering comes.
Yeah.
It's like what you do with what happens to you. So this is optional, and you have several choices. You can have just the pain that comes to teach you something or to redirect you to a different pathway, or you can be stuck in suffering. So this was a good example that
That's good.
makes
Thank
me
you.
think.
Absolutely. Alidu, he says the exact same thing. He says that suffering it's our rebellion to accept the pain and realize that we have the power to change and to get out of it.
Can I say something?
Absolutely, please.
It's not that easy.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. To quote Chris Martin, nobody said it was easy. But Christ did say that it could be light. It didn't have to be a burden in a way, but not easy, definitely.
And lots of hard work.
Hard work.
Hard work. Hard work. Hard work. And just a silly analogy that came to my mind now is, if you think about the work on developing ourselves, just as if we're trying to push, for example, a big rock. If we're trying to do it by ourselves, it can be very hard. But we have tools that can help us. Maybe we put some wheels underneath the rock. Maybe we take the lever and help it and roll it. So it's realizing that even though it might be hard work, we have tools to help us get through it. One of them being the gospel, the other being our community, right? The other being our families, our friends, and so on and so forth. The law of society, also one of the divine laws, is there for a reason, right? Nobody said that we have to do this alone. On the contrary, right? It's by building our community that we can all grow, because we can't. If you think about like the transition of Earth into a regeneration planet, it can't be done by one person. It has to be done by everyone, right? And if you think about it, just thought about it now, Christ, he was pretty, I'd say, as the Spirit tells us, right? He is our guide and he is our model. He could have done it by himself, right? He didn't need the apostles, right? But that in itself is an example that if we want to improve, if we want to develop, right? You need that community. We need those apostles. We need one helping one another to build what we call fraternity. There's a reason why FSS is called FSS, right? That fraternity is very important to us. I'm going to skip a few slides here. Actually. Yeah, I'll go to this one. So we've already talked about most of those, okay? I like the previous slide better. But I just wanted to focus on the very last one on the right there. It's when Paul, right, this one that we talked about, that he was chasing Christians and all that. At one point in the letter to the Philippians, he said, I can do all this through him who gives me strength. So especially when we think, or when we are suffering or in deep pain and we think that we can't do it anymore, Paul is at a pretty bad place, right? And he was able to resurrect in a way from his pain and walk to be one of the apostles that showed the biggest strength, right? Why? It's because he did it through him. What does it mean to do it through him? What do you guys think? Part 3 of the Spirit's book again has all the divine laws. The gospel has a lot of the divine laws as well. And the divine laws are basically these, I like to think it as a compass, right? It's just to help us guide. If we need a guide, if we need some guidance to know which path should I take, the divine laws can help us tremendously. And when we are doing that, we have all the strength, we have all the capacity, we are fully capable of developing all our virtues, all our respect, all our meekness, all our self-love through him who gives us strength. And still got a few minutes, and I wanted, we love bringing triangles here. I don't know if you've noticed, but we love bringing triangles because it's a very self-sustaining piece, and it has the bases and it has the result. So this is basically what Jesus taught us in Matthew, right? He said to love our God, to love ourselves, and to love others. And we're going to walk through a bit of a workflow here, and starting from the top, right? Loving the divine laws. Loving the divine laws would be to learn about them, realize that they can help us, and start using it. So, loving the divine laws, as we do that, we will invariably be practicing our virtues. For example, the law of love, charity, and justice. The more we start to think about it, the law of cause and effect also will help us develop virtues. What Mary was talking about, recognizing, for example, those times that we're invited to change, that in itself is a huge effort of humility, right? It's realizing that we're not perfect, right? That we still have some flaws, and because we have them, we can for sure improve them. We can for sure develop virtues that overcome those flaws. So as we start to practice the virtues, we then start to love ourselves, right? If you remember in the very beginning, how a leader describes self-love is utilizing our time to develop our virtues through the divine laws. So this becomes a bit of a circle. We like to call it the virtuous cycle, right? The more I start to learn about how Jesus behaved, for example, or what he told us, the more we learn about the divine laws, the more we can put them into practice by developing our virtues, and that is an act of self-love. And we feel good about it, and then it becomes an endless cycle. And it's interesting because it makes us feel a lot freer. It makes us feel a lot more free. Because it no longer brings us so much pain. It no longer brings us so much anxiety, and so on and so forth. It makes us feel a lot more at peace with ourselves. And to help close this gap here, we can bring something that Jesus told us in John chapter 8, which is a very famous quote when he said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Right? So it starts by knowing the truth, right? Knowing a little bit of the divine laws. Then the other truth is knowing about ourselves, right? Recognizing those things that maybe should be improved, and it's utilizing that truth to practice and to develop our virtues. That will set all of us free. Otherwise, Jesus wouldn't have said it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to skip a bunch of slides, and I'm going to save this for another time. But because this is really interesting, but we can talk about it later. Okay. Let's get to the end. Right, so how do I know? How do I know that I'm practicing self-love? Right, and to reflect upon this, we can bring a passage from Matthew 11, which is one of my favorite, when Jesus says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." So let's just think about this one first. You know, who out of us is not feeling a little bit burdened? Who out of us do not feel maybe a little bit anxious or weary at times? Right? And Christ is saying, "Come to me, and I will give you rest." It's interesting that he starts with "come to me," so it's an action, right? It depends on us going to him. He's not saying that he'll come to us and do everything for us, but it's an active action. It's a conscious act of us going to him. And then he says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." So, I don't know the word in Portuguese, but yoke is the thing that you put around the neck of oxen, of gado, para direcioná-los. Sorry, I apologize, I don't know the word in Portuguese. But yeah, it's basically é uma coisa de madeira que se coloca em volta do pescoço de provavelmente, não vou saber, mas é. Canga. But anyhow, that is to basically drive direction, right? That's why they put this around em volta do pescoço dos bois, é para que eles não saiam da direção, eles sempre caminhem juntos.
Arreio.
Arreio. Então, maybe. Thank you. I wouldn't know.
We got the idea.
But yes, exactly. So the idea, jugo. Thank you. Of course. Jugo. Thank you, Jugo. And exactly, the point of it is take upon my yoke. So take upon Jesus' yoke, meaning take his direction, take his journey, take the teachings that he's teaching us, and use that to drive our path. Right, our compass, if you will. Right, and he says, "For I am gentle and humble in heart." So he's not asking us to blindly use his teachings, because he has a lot of moral. He showed us that he's gentle. He showed us that he's humble. So he's not asking you to just believe him, because he showed us that his path is the path of love. He showed us that his path is the path of kindness, of fraternity, of respect, right? So he showed us instead of having to ask to do it without any know-how. And then you will find rest for yourselves. And then he ends with, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So the yoke of his, o jugo dele, is easy, and I'll remember how it is in Portuguese in a bit. But yeah, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Right, so he's not telling us that he will take away our pain necessarily or our sufferings, but he's telling us that with him, right, we'll still go through tribulations, we'll still go through problems, but the way we go through them is going to be light. And meu jugo é suave, meu fardo é leve. That's how it is in Portuguese. So that's it. We're at time. So I skipped a few slides, so I'm going to talk about this later because there's some good slides about more technical slides, but so we'll talk about it next time. So questions or comments, folks online, thank you for participating. You good? Yeah? Awesome. Well, thank you all. And right now we'll go and we'll do a quick prayer. And then we go to the passes, and laying of hands. And Maddie, she's going to be here kind of directing people in and out. So thank you, Mary. And thank you, John, for helping us in the technology. And we'll end in a quick prayer. So if we were to close our eyes and imagine that picture that we were just looking at of Jesus hugging ourselves. And in that hug, Jesus is telling us to love ourselves, to respect ourselves, to realize that we are capable. Because through Him we can do it all. Master Jesus, we thank you for your kindness, for your inspiration, and for the love that you show us daily. And we ask that we can be more and more in communion with you, so we can feel more of that love, more of that kindness within ourselves, and then bring it to the world around us. And we also thank our Father for the opportunity to be here today, and to give us the ability to even feel love, to have such an amazing feeling that is to love, the feeling of peace, the feeling of kindness. Thank you, Lord. And may your love guide us, strengthen us, and inspire us